Our story begins with a smirk from a man in glasses, telling him not to overthink it and just sign the paper. Reincarnated holds the pen, but he looks highly suspicious of the entire offer. Then our protagonist asks if that business is truly a safe investment. The man in glasses loses his temper, slams the table, and tells the boy to stop thinking. Right after, he calms down and asks if Ran really thinks he would trick a high school friend. The scammer claims that if the young man puts his money in there, it will multiply all by itself. Following that, he uses a low blow, saying it broke his heart to see the young man getting work calls. And on top of that, having to bow down to his boss even during his own father's memorial service. At that exact moment, a wave of deep anger surged in our character's heart because the man brought up that subject. But there was nothing he could do, so he could only hope that the kindness in front of him was genuine. And just like a complete fool, our protagonist ends up signing that suspicious contract. Soon after, the story jumps 2 years into the present day. We then see a very dark and messy apartment with light coming from a cracked open door. Inside the bathroom, Ran is losing his lunch, throwing up everything he ate into the toilet. He laments to himself, saying that was the first decent meal he had enjoyed in a very long time. The narrator describes him as a 28-year-old South Korean living a substandard life. The awful person who got him into this mess has been missing for 1 year, while he barely survives, drowning in debt. With 5 hours left before his shift, he decides to read a little, since that is his only hobby. Our protagonist then picks up a book called Dark Heather to read for 30 minutes. He must have read this piece of work more than 100 times, but it never loses its charm to him. This is the only thing that allows him to escape for a brief moment from the miserable life he leads. Suddenly, while reading, the young man senses something strange and goes on high alert. Through the window, the young man sees a glowing purple feather floating mysteriously outside. He wonders if it might be a crow feather, but its color was entirely different. In the next instant, out of nowhere, our protagonist's nose starts bleeding. The young man wonders what is happening as his blood stains the entire book. Right after, he feels a sharp pain in his chest and realizes something is wrong with his heart. The book begins to glow with a sinister energy, and the boy can no longer breathe properly. Feeling his strength fading away, he grows completely desperate with the situation. Reincarnated then wonders if his life would really end like this, in such a meaningless way. Even in his final moment, the last thing he sees is the face of that awful scammer. The young man laments that he was unable to do anything as his body goes still on the bed. A mission complete message appears, and suddenly, Reincarnated wakes up startled in a dark place. Totally confused, he wonders what just happened and if it was all nothing but a dream. At that moment, the protagonist notices that his eyes look different, glowing with a bright blue color. Looking around, he sees a luxurious and completely unfamiliar place and wonders where he is. The room seems to belong to someone of nobility, and the boy gets even more confused by the situation. With a bead of sweat running down his face, he tries to understand what is going on. Suddenly, the young man hears a noise and sees a crow with glowing red eyes right outside. As he approaches the window, he notices there are several ominous crows perched in the trees. Then, one of the crows breaks the window and flies right toward him, leaving our protagonist terrified. The bird attacks him on the bed and he screams for help, thinking it is a nightmare caused by a lack of sleep. While trying to protect himself, he begs to wake up from this nightmare as quickly as possible. But suddenly, the crow stops the attack and starts nuzzling his hand affectionately. Sitting on the bed, he wonders why the crow became so friendly all of a sudden. Next, the mysterious bird drops a black feather into the young man's hand. Right after, all the other crows that were outside begin to fly away. Looking up at the night sky, Reincarnated finally notices something very bizarre. In the sky, there are 3 moons of different colors, one blue, one red, and one yellow. He then sees a banner with the exact same symbol of the 3 moons and begins to connect the dots. At first, the boy was too confused to understand, but it did not take long for him to realize the truth. That place was not the reality he knew, and at that moment, he hears a voice from the other side of the door. A woman introduces herself as Anna and calls out to him, addressing him as Prince Reincarnated. Highly startled, he yells for her to wait a second and begs her not to open the door. The young man rushes over and locks the door, saying he is not feeling very well at the moment. Outside, the maid is surprised by the prince's sudden reaction. Then, our protagonist falls to the floor and complains of a headache from the tumble. The young lady says she will return later, and it hits him that she called him Reincarnated. With his hand on his head, he finally remembers that this is the world of the novel he read countless times. He's in the world of Dark Heather, and has taken over the body of the Empire's 7th prince, Reincarnated. Worst of all, he took over a character destined for a miserable end right at the beginning of the story. Sitting on the balcony, he wonders how he ended up inside a novel of all things in this specific body. At that moment, a voice calls out to him, and a man in glasses introduces himself as Sign. Our protagonist is shocked because he remembers that Sign is the 7th prince's secretary. The secretary says he came personally out of concern, since it is unusual for the prince to skip dinner. He then adjusts his glasses and asks if the boy is feeling any better. The young man tries to keep his composure and decides that, for now, he needs to act just like the real Aberrant. With that, he replies that he is feeling a bit better, and the secretary says it is good to hear that. The man then asks Anna to set the table for his highness, and she readily agrees. The young lady serves the food, and Rand notices she is trembling and that the meal looks like dog food. To help out, he says he can pour his own tea, but as he reaches for the teapot, he accidentally knocks it over. The hot tea spills across the table, leaving the maid completely in a panic. The girl gets a look of pure terror on her face, as if something terrible is about to happen to her. Next, she throws herself to the floor and desperately begs for forgiveness, leaving the prince confused. The young man wonders why she is acting as if it is the end of the world over a simple accident. At that instant, he recalls a very important detail: the original Ranabaran was an absolute piece of garbage. The prince was notorious for destroying property and throwing violent tantrums over the smallest things. The secretary, who was watching everything, says he was surprised to hear the noble prince was unwell. But he goes on to say he is glad to see him well enough to cause trouble again. Next, the man apologizes for interrupting and asks the prince to sign a few documents. Our character thinks this is nonsense, because what kind of important business would a useless prince be handling? He quickly realizes these are forged documents meant to embezzle the 7th prince's share of the budget. The only reason a mere servant like Sign would go this far is because he is related to the empress. However, the original Man was an idiot who had absolutely no clue what was going on. Seeing the delay, the secretary asks if he forgot how to sign his own name, openly mocking the prince. He gets annoyed thinking about how a member of the imperial family is being ridiculed by a simple secretary. The man keeps going, saying it is a shame, but that is exactly why he is needed, so the prince should just sign. At that moment, a memory of his past life as a complete failure flashes through his mind. And along with the memory comes the image of that scammer saying those exact same words to him. If he goes through with this, it will be no different from his real life, where he was just a helpless victim. Determined, he decides he will no longer live as a helpless victim in his new life. With that, he confronts Sign, stating that the budget calculations look incorrect and wasteful. The secretary is taken aback and says with a mocking smile that he completely underestimated him. But he quickly changes the subject, bringing up the food, and pressures him to sign so he can review it later. While trying to force him to sign, the secretary is interrupted by a very loud crashing noise. The maid, who is watching everything closely, is completely shocked by what just happened. On the floor, we see a teacup and a pocket watch completely shattered in the middle of the spilled liquid. The secretary asks for the meaning of that, and the prince apologizes, saying his hand slipped. Rand knows the man is just a distant relative of the empress, and she does not even know he exists. Without a second thought, our protagonist throws the plate of food right at the secretary. The prince's completely unexpected behavior leaves the man in glasses furious and startled. He then states that his hand slipped because of the secretary, so the responsibility falls entirely on him. The young man remembers how miserable his life used to be and decides he will no longer live in such a pathetic way. With a face full of anger, the man glares at Rand, who asks why he is just standing there doing nothing. Our protagonist then points to the floor and complains that the rug is completely filthy. With a terrifying gaze, the prince orders the secretary to clean up all that mess immediately. Looking at the broken watch, he reinforces determination to survive at all costs in this world. In this world, the imperial family is treated as if they were true gods among mortals. They possess special abilities, and their blonde hair is the ultimate proof of their nobility and divinity. But there is a single exception to this rule, and that is the useless 7th Prince Ranabaran. He is foolish, has a horrible temper, and worst of all, has that detestable black hair. In his thoughts, the secretary wonders if he paid bribes just to end up serving someone like him. Even with all the hatred, the man has no choice but to get on his knees and clean the mess off the floor. After a while spent cleaning the floor, he finally informs the prince that he has finished the job. But just as the man was about to leave, Rand knocks another cup onto the floor on purpose. The prince says he took far too long and that this would be a great opportunity to get some more practice. With a cold look, the young man orders him to clean it again, and this time, faster than before. The secretary comments that he is acting strange and threatens to tell the empress everything. But our protagonist knows the empress does not even speak to him, so it is an empty threat. Seeing that the secretary has not learned his lesson, Rand turns to the maid and tells her to cover her ears. With a dark look, he warns that if she hears a single word, he will make her work without her fingers. Terrified, the young lady obeys and covers her ears with all the strength she has without questioning him. The young man continues to humiliate the secretary, who is completely speechless given the situation. With an expression of pure hatred, the man in glasses does not know how to react to that predicament. His face suddenly goes pale as if he had just seen a ghost. Later on, the maids comment that the 7th prince has been acting very strangely. One of them says he has become much more terrifying, and she wonders if they will even survive the year. Fortunately, he has not been leaving the palace much and stays locked away in his room. A coworker then alerts Anna that it is her turn to clean, and the girl gets startled by the reminder. Inside the library, Ranabaran observes the beautiful weather outside through the window. The young man thinks he is doing well playing the part of the prince, and the servants already avoid him out of fear. Since that day, Sign's attitude completely changed, and the secretary never showed his face around there again. He is at peace because he has 1 year until the main story begins and 3 years until his fated end. The young man remembers how he read this novel over 100 times and how much he loves the story. There is still a long time before the novel's actual protagonist appears, so he will just enjoy the peace for now. He looks up at the sky and thinks it would be nice to see that beautiful scenery from above if he had wings. But out of nowhere, something very strange happens, and he is left completely shocked by the situation. With that, the cup he was holding simply slips from his hand and shatters on the floor. The young man falls to the ground, twisting in pain as his entire body begins to burn. Agonizing, he thinks that this time is different, feeling his body completely on fire. At that moment, Anna knocks on the door and asks for permission to enter and clean the library. Getting no answer, the young lady steps inside and feels relieved, thinking he is not there. Right after, the girl notices the shards on the floor and wonders what happened there. She kneels down and thinks that with the value of that single cup, her family could live for an entire month. But a strange noise interrupts her, and she looks to the side, thoroughly confused. Suddenly, a crow with red eyes flies right toward her, leaving the young lady startled. The crow then lands on the floor, and its shadow looks exactly like a person with wings. The maid picks up the crow and asks how it got in there, since a very terrifying person lives in this place. The crow then thinks to himself that he cannot believe what just happened. Looking at his reflection in the window, he wonders if he turned into a crow and why this happened. The young lady says she would love to look after him, but if the prince saw them together, they would both be in deep trouble. With that, the maid tosses the crow out the window, while our hero desperately wishes she would not let him go. Free falling from the tower, the prince screams in his thoughts, terrified of what is going to happen. Plummeting toward the forest, he is certain he is going to smash into the ground and perish. But he remembers that he now has wings and wonders if he can use them to survive. Desperate not to end his journey here, he focuses all his energy to manage to fly at any cost. Suddenly, the fall stops, and the crow begins to soar back up into the sky, leaving him confused. The young man is amazed to feel that he is actually controlling the wings and truly flying. Rand celebrates that he is flying, but soon wonders if he will be able to turn back into a human. The scene then shifts to nighttime at the palace, showing the three moons once again. Back in his room, the young man is exhausted but relieved that he managed to transform back. He then discovers that he can turn into a crow just by imagining that he wants to do it. The boy wonders if this is because of the crow's curse from the very first day he arrived here. Even though he does not know the source of this power, he is certain that no one can find out about it. This transformation does not exist in the original story, so the plot could change completely. A maid knocks on the door and alerts him that the dinner ritual will begin shortly, and he needs to get ready. Our protagonist then realizes with a serious expression that the day has finally arrived. Once a month, the emperor and his children perform a ritual that is actually a test of succession. Seeing it in person is very different from just reading about it in the novel, and he takes a seat at the far end of the table. The young man observes his blonde siblings and thinks that next to them, he is no different from a crow. Suddenly, one of the princes insults him and asks if he has no shame being there. That is the 8th prince, Selos Avaran, his younger half, brother from a different mother. The brother continues to taunt him, asking if he is so pathetic that he cannot even understand what is being said. Selos gets annoyed at being ignored, but Rand knows they are both just minor villains in the grand scheme of the story. A woman then interrupts them and says it is inappropriate to cause a scene in front of the emperor. Rand recognizes her as the first princess and notes that everyone is seated in order of hierarchy. In this world, there is a special power called Manus, which is stronger the lighter a person's hair is. But the 7th prince's body has black hair, making him the only member of royalty without the power of Manus. And of course, at the very peak of all this Manus power in this world is the emperor. With his gleaming white hair, the emperor's grand entrance is announced to everyone in the hall. With a commanding aura, the emperor states there is no need to waste any more time, and the ritual begins. He then places his hand upon a blue tablet, which is an ancient relic from the very first emperor. When he channels his Manus into the relic, the object measures the user's power like a type of test. A massive blue light emerges, and the distance it travels is the exact measurement of each person's power. The emperor's light reaches all the way to the end of the table, and Rand Aberrant is amazed by such vast power. The emperor then steps back and challenges anyone who wishes to try to take a step forward. Our protagonist just watches everything in silence, since he knows he does not possess any power at all. The first prince, with a confident smile, offers to try and steps up to the table. The young man knows that normally only he participates, because once a rank is established, it is hard to change. The amount of Manus equals raw power, and the first prince demonstrates this clearly to everyone present. Through this ritual, he reaffirms his strength and shows everyone who the next emperor will be. But suddenly, something completely unexpected happens, and the first prince lets out a groan of pain. His younger brother is shocked and calls out to him in worry, not understanding what is going on. Out of nowhere, the first prince begins to cough up a large amount of blood, and everyone panics. Amid the chaos, Rand is the only one who understands the situation, and knows the prince will not last much longer. Seeing the heir to the throne in that state meant only one thing: the main story had officially begun. Manus is a special power in this world that manifests within the royal family in different forms. For example, the first prince uses water Manus, and the second prince uses fire Manus. Rand Aberrant knows that the result of today's test was already set, and it would only cover half the table. But what is happening right now is only supposed to occur in 6 months, not today. Our hero is shocked because, in the original story, he would only start having these symptoms in half a year. He then wonders why he can transform into a crow, given that he was supposed to be unable to use manus. An ability that appeared out of nowhere right after his possession could not just be a coincidence. The scene changes, and we see a man breaking a chain with his bare hands, showing he is a monster in brute strength. Another blonde man mocks him, saying he thought he was an assassin, but he is just a weakling without manus. The young man with black hair replies with a smile that if he were an assassin, the other would already be gone. Shocked, the blonde man realizes that someone managed to slip into the future emperor's room completely unnoticed. Filled with rage, the blonde man smashes a glass on the floor, totally frustrated with the situation. He then punches a mirror and laments, saying everything was perfectly fine until that morning. But as he strikes the mirror, his hand glows with a blue energy and he is left shocked by it. The first prince then falls to his knees on the floor, completely desperate over his situation. He thinks that his body catches fire whenever he uses manus, and fears he might never be able to use it again. But he refuses to believe this, because he is the heir and the next ruler of the empire. With that, he convinces himself that he is different from the others and tries to compose himself as best as he can. He sits down to relax for a moment, but a voice warns him to drop that if he wants to live. Startled, the heir turns around and asks who is there, spotting a silhouette in the darkness. Our protagonist then destroys the object with ease, showing off his monstrous physical strength. The blonde man mocks him, thinking he was an assassin, but sees he is just a weakling without manus. The young man with black hair responds that if he were an assassin, the other would already be gone. The heir is shocked to think that someone infiltrated his room, which is one of the most secure places. The noble then asks how he got in, and our hero replies that he scaled the outer wall. Outside, we see just how high up the place is, and the prince refuses to believe the story. Ran then changes the subject and asks how his body has been feeling lately. The prince gives a subtle smirk, as if he found all of this to be a massive joke. Next, he bursts into hysterical laughter, leaving our protagonist quite confused. The young man with black hair notices that the heir has finally understood the entire situation. The blonde man accuses him of poisoning him to use it as leverage when he becomes emperor. He then tries to grab Ran, saying his plan failed, and calls him a foolish little brother. Our hero warns that in 1 week, the prince will wish his journey were over, with blood pouring from his eyes. The unexpected threat leaves the heir completely shocked and utterly speechless. Rand sits down calmly and states that he wants to make one thing very clear to his brother. He explains that the prince's body is going to fall apart, and he does not even know who is truly behind it. With a serious look, he states that the heir needs to listen very carefully to what he is about to say. The young man says this is the very last chance the prince has to manage to save his own life. Flying away, Rand thinks the prince is a coward and did not even order anyone to follow him as he left the palace. With this, our protagonist will be able to use the hair however he sees fit for the time being. He then flies over the palace, thinking about how remarkably convenient this crow ability turns out to be. Suddenly, the crow gets an idea upon realizing that he is already outside the palace grounds. Without a second thought, he takes advantage of the opportunity and flies away toward the city. The next day, back at the palace, our hero wonders what he is going to do about the situation. A maid is worried because the prince has not eaten in 2 days, and there is no sign of movement in the room. The young lady panics, thinking something terrible has happened and that she will be blamed for the situation. Desperate, she begins knocking on the door, calling out for the prince and asking if he is all right. Rand opens the door right on cue, and the young lady loses her balance, barging right into the young man's room. Because of this, she trips and falls to the floor, dropping the entire tray of food she was carrying with her. The food scatters across the floor, making a mess of everything around, including our protagonist's shoes. The young man just observes the entire scene with a very serious expression, completely speechless. The maid panics and says she has committed a deadly offense simply out of worrying for him. Crying hysterically, the girl begs for forgiveness for causing all that chaos in his room. With a cold look, he asks how she plans to take responsibility for the mess, and the young lady begs for her life. But he tells her to forget about that, clean everything up in 5 minutes, and vanish from his sight forever. He forbids her from ever approaching his quarters again, and thinks to himself that he will have no more disruptions. Time moves forward, and the scene shows a blue sky with several birds flying freely through the air. 1 month has passed since the first prince had that strange bleeding episode during the ritual. During this time, a rumor began to spread through the palace about the heir losing his power. To the other princes and princesses, that rumor signaled a massive opportunity to gain power. In the novel, to put an end to the rumors, the crown prince begs the emperor to bring the hunt forward. Our hero thinks the plot is moving along but wonders if this affects the external protagonist. Today is the day of the hunting competition, and Rand hopes to find someone to deliver something to. Suddenly, one of the princes calls him an insect and begins to taunt him for no apparent reason. He then mocks our protagonist's black horse, making Rand think the noble is far more impulsive than usual. The young man decides to just ignore him, as he has a much more important event to focus on that day. With a smile, he pets his horse and thinks that at least he has a way with animals. Looking ahead with a serious expression, he realizes they have finally reached their destination. The young man then keeps riding along with the other nobles toward the site of the annual ritual. They arrive at the Tower of the Beginning, where the opening ritual takes place every single year in the kingdom. Ranabaran explains that as soon as the first prince completes the ritual, the competition will begin. In reality, he knows that this is less of a competition and more of a highly cruel political show. The emperor then orders the crown prince to prepare for the ritual, and he agrees on the spot. The hare turns to another prince and asks if he has already thought about his wish. The other prince explains that it is the wish the winner gets to ask for, and the hare replies that he will obviously win. The ritual is a display of the next emperor's power in front of all the assembled nobles. The nobles comment that it is an honor to witness his strength, but one of them mentions a rumor about an incident. In a rage, the crown prince thinks that insect better not have been just bluffing. Our protagonist just watches everything with a highly confident and calm smirk. The hare thinks that if he was tricked, he will end him in the most agonizing way he can possibly imagine. Ranabaran observes the prince from afar and advises him not to get so worked up over the situation. The young man says that if he follows the instructions, something very interesting will happen today. The scene then shifts to the night sky filling up with dark, mysterious clouds. Suddenly, the hare releases a massive amount of manas, leaving everyone deeply impressed. His power is so immense that a vortex of energy forms all around him at the sight. Bolts of blue energy begin to crackle across the entire place with terrifying force. The power continues to grow out of control, and everyone is left shocked by the display. People begin to get dragged in by the vortex, and a man yells for everyone to watch out. A guard orders everyone to fall back immediately, while Rand simply observes the situation. With a determined look, the prince fills with confidence and reaffirms his position in the royalty. He then bellows his name Razia Abaran with all his might for everyone present to hear. Next, he declares himself as the one destined to be the next emperor and releases even more power. A massive wave of water forms and begins to surge across the entire ritual arena. The prince then levitates all that water into the sky, an incredible demonstration of power. In the sky, the clouds close in, and the water he levitated begins to accumulate high above. Right after, a heavy downpour begins to fall upon everyone there, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. A general watches the scene and comments on the nature of the powerful royal family's manas. The crowd then erupts into cheers of celebration and hails the first prince with fervor. In a flashback, we see Rand handing a stone to the hare, who questions if he is mocking him. Our hero explains that the stone absorbs polluted manas, and that he can choose to pass away if he does not want it. The prince gets annoyed but seems to have no other choice but to accept the help. Back in the present, Rand thinks he bought himself some time by using an item that should only appear in the future. At that moment, a man approaches him and greets him in a highly respectful manner. The man says he brought the bag he requested, and our protagonist welcomes him with a smile. Rand criticizes him for being unable to handle a simple task and asks if he brought the bag exactly as it was. Sign complains about the crazy black horse that almost hurt him, which he claims was brought on purpose for the prince. At that moment, a horn sounds throughout the entire area, announcing the start of something major. The emperor then raises his hand to draw the attention of all the nobles present there. With a single command, he announces that the royal hunting competition has finally begun. The other competitors get excited, but they know the royal family will most likely win yet again. Our protagonist does not care about the competition and plans to avoid drawing too much attention. His true objective there is to locate the former commander of the knights, Agony Fetus. The commander is talking to a young man who praises the divine power displayed during the ritual. Agony comments that he felt the emperor wanted to break the noble's spirit with that display. His servant begs him not to speak such blasphemy, but the duke says no one can hear them. The commander states there is a reason he is still breathing at his age, at least for the time being. The hunt takes place in the Imperial Forest, which is divided into 3 main hunting zones. Rand looks at a map showing the zones for small, medium, and large animals to find his bearings. He remembers that in the novel, Agony presented the emperor with a golden fox during this very competition. Because of this, he scouted the forest as a crow to find the exact location of the rare fox. He deduced the spot would be near a lake in the southwest, since Agony washed his hands afterward. His plan is to get there before him and wait for the right moment to strike, and the horse seems to understand. The young man is relieved that Sign managed to bring the bag on time without any major issues. All he needs to do now is deliver what is inside the bag to Duke Agony Fetus. But out of nowhere, his horse bolts at high speed through the forest, leaving him completely surprised. The animal stops abruptly and stumps its hoof hard on the ground, making a loud noise. Our protagonist asks the horse why it stopped and if it is feeling sick. Next, he questions if the animal spotted some wild beast nearby and stopped because of it. But at that moment, he gets another idea about what might be happening with the horse. The prince then wonders if the bag he is carrying is simply too heavy for the animal. He gets annoyed and complains to the horse for being stubborn while others are out there pulling wagons. The young man threatens to tell the stable master to leave him starving if he keeps acting this way. The horse then stumps its hoof even harder, clearly showing off its stubbornness. Right after, the animal takes off running and leaves him behind all alone in the forest with the bag. Alone in the forest, our protagonist thinks that he is completely stuck in a terrible situation. Meanwhile, Agony comments that normally it would be easy to catch a few wolves or deer, but it seems luck is not on their side, and the commander laments that he has grown too old. He says he spent his whole life living as a sword and shield, but he simply cannot challenge time. The servant begs him not to say that, since he is already a living legend to the entire empire. Agony waves off the compliments and says that now he is just a retired old man and nothing more. The commander then asks Talon if he has ever seen the royal family up close before. The noble asserts that he will understand just how magnificent they are once he faces them directly. In a flashback, he explains that the royal family are gods, and their own family has protected them for 1,000 years. He tells his son that he must take his place and take pride in his absolute loyalty to the royalty. In another memory, he shows the boy his family's group of merchants who serve the royalty. With a serious look, the commander then states that past that point lies the city temple. The carriage stops suddenly, and the driver apologizes, saying something got caught in the wheel. The noble then tells him to head back inside, and says he will take care of clearing it out himself. Out on the street, he sees a person collapsed on the ground right in front of his luxury carriage. The vehicle's wheel is soiled, and the ground is stained, showing exactly what occurred there. The commander says it appears to be a wanderer who got caught trying to steal the tributes. With a sad look, he thinks to himself that this is a very common scene to witness in that region. His curious son asks what is happening and says he wants to go outside to look too. Agony forbids him from leaving, and the boy gets a look of fear on his face. But the boy goes out anyway, and his father scolds him, saying he should not have stepped out from there. The commander then lies to his son, telling him that it was absolutely nothing at all. Back in the present, the noble reflects that the boy was not even 10 years old at the time. He then wonders if darkness exists even with an empire as noble as this one. The servant snaps him out of his thoughts, saying they need to save the family's honor in the hunt. Agony apologizes and mentions he knows a spot nearby where a golden fox usually appears. Meanwhile, Ran is running through the forest, swearing he is going to turn his horse into a barbecue. He cannot transform because of the bag and cannot afford to lose sight of the Duke right now. The prince remembers that even the small animal zone is quite dangerous to walk through unprepared. Suddenly, he hears a rustle and wonders if something is finally emerging from the bushes. The young man laments not bringing a weapon and wonders what to do with the heavy bag. He then decides to take a chance and hurls a stone toward the noise just as the servant spots something. The stone our hero threw hits the servant squarely in the face, knocking him flat on the ground. Rand is left confused by the scene, but upon seeing the young man's hair color, he realizes what he did. The Duke calls out for Talon, and our protagonist quickly hides to avoid being spotted. With that blue hair, he is certain that this young man is Duke Fetus's right-hand assistant. Lying on the ground, we see Talon Kryza completely unconscious after taking the hit from the stone. Our protagonist grows frantic as he never expected to run into him in that particular manner. We then see the former commander and war hero, the great Duke Agony Fetus. He will eventually become the mentor to the novel's actual protagonist and one day turn the empire upside down. Hiding, the prince thinks to himself that he cannot be found by him here under any circumstances. The original plan was to accuse him of trying to steal the prey of a member of royalty. As punishment, he would force him to carry a bag of stones for the remainder of the competition. But now, with everything ruined, the young man has no clue what to do, and things have become messy. The Duke finds the stone and realizes it was thrown deliberately by someone nearby. He then wonders if that was an assassin who was aiming to attack him. At that moment, Talon wakes up and calls out to his master with great difficulty and pain. The commander approaches and asks him to speak up about anything he can recall regarding the attack. Rand panics, because if he is discovered, he will be accused of trying to end the Duke's life. Filled with fear, the assistant tries to remember what he saw right before being hit by the stone. Our hero becomes utterly desperate and has no idea how he is going to get out of this mess. We see a cut on the assistant's face, who is still quite dazed from the impact. To Rand's immense relief, the servant says it all happened too fast, and the prince thanks his good luck. The Duke understands the situation, but suddenly he senses something and glares into the woods. With a sharp gaze, the commander seems to have located our protagonist's exact presence. Rand realizes this is his chance and begins to sprint as far away from there as possible. The noble tells Talon to wait and says he is going to catch the attacker and bring him back. Next, the Duke charges at high speed through the forest right after our hero. The prince complains that his stamina is already depleted from running with that heavy bag. He then wonders if he has run far enough to lose an old man like the Duke. The noble charges ahead with everything, and our hero wonders how he can be so fast when he is supposed to be retired. The commander accuses him of belonging to a cult, and Rand realizes he will be caught very soon. Desperate, he thinks about turning into a crow but laments not having his horse right now. The young man decides against it and just focuses on running as fast as he humanly can. But suddenly, something shifts, and a dark energy begins to emanate from his feet. The strange dark energy then envelops his entire body in a mysterious fashion. The Duke notices that the target has grown faster and that his very shape seems to have altered. Frustrated, he thinks his eyes must be playing tricks on him, but accelerates so he does not lose him. The commander stops in a clearing and wonders if he ended up losing the fugitive after all. Rand feels his body growing lighter and wonders if he turned into a crow, but keeps running anyway. Suddenly, he hears horse hooves and wonders if his animal has actually come back. The reflection in someone's eye shows a horse approaching at a rapid pace. To his absolute surprise, the horse that abandoned him is back, and he thinks this is pure madness. Elsewhere, a prince observes something with a look of surprise stamped across his face. He asks his brother if he really managed to capture that prey entirely on his own. We then see a massive wild boar, and the hare asks if it is really that hard to believe. The brother congratulates him and asks what wish he will request from the emperor for his victory. With a dark smile, the hare states that he already has something specific in mind to ask for. Far from there, our protagonist is exhausted, leaning against a tree deep in the forest. With his hands on his head, the young man thinks he is completely stuck in a terrible situation. He then recalls that he ended up losing the bag while fleeing for his life. The young man grows frantic because he lost the most critical item, and everything went entirely wrong. Completely disheartened, he lies down on the ground, clueless as to what to do next. He decides that wallowing in regret will not help and resolves to head back to search for the bag. Meanwhile, Talon sees his master returning and feels deeply relieved by his safe arrival. The Duke asks how his head is feeling, and the servant says he is alright but a bit dizzy. The commander laments losing the fugitive and blames either his old age or the target's sheer speed. The servant then reveals the bag he found dropped in the grass on his way back. Talon comments that the bag is highly luxurious, but wonders why it is filled to the brim with stones. Hiding nearby, Ren gets nervous and thinks about claiming it was just someone's silly prank. But he ends up stepping out from his hiding spot and shouts that the bag belongs to him. Talon recognizes him, and the Duke is left shocked to learn that he is a prince of the Empire. Left with no choice, the two drop to their knees and greet the seventh prince with absolute respect. The Duke then asks if the bag belongs to him, and Rand confirms, saying he was just wondering where it went. The young man steps closer and accuses him of stealing his item, acting quite irritated. The commander denies the accusation and states that he merely stumbled upon it by chance in the grass. Rand remarks that this is the exact excuse anyone would give to avoid having their wrist sliced. The prince then changes the subject and asks why his assistant is bleeding. Talon gets nervous and does not know how to answer regarding the injury on his face. Suddenly, the assistant stands up and points toward the prince with a shocked expression. He tries to ask something, but our protagonist cuts him off right then and there. The prince strikes the servant, and the Duke is startled by the sudden display of aggression. With that, he grabs the servant by his hair and calls him an ill-mannered, inferior brat. He then threatens the young man, saying he can fix his head if he draws a blade. The servant is left terrified by the threat and tries to stammer out something to the prince. The Duke apologizes for his servant, and Rand praises his loyalty even given the situation. But in his thoughts, he calls him an imperial hound who does not even blink at the sight of his servant perishing. The commander seems to perceive the true intent hidden behind our protagonist's words. Rand Aberan then reflects that his son will also grow up to become a loyal hound to the Empire. The prince hands the bag back and says he trusts him to carry it for the rest of today. He then asserts that it is a highly critical item and that he must not drop it, even if his journey ends. The Duke falls silent for a moment but ultimately accepts the prince's command. With a serious expression, he states that he will humbly obey the glorious order. Our protagonist bids them farewell and walks away, feeling much lighter without the bag. He feels a bit bad for Talon, but figures he absolutely needed to plant that seed of doubt. Talon apologizes to his master for causing him all that unnecessary trouble. The Duke tells him to count himself lucky that his limbs are still intact and says they are going to rest. Suddenly, the servant mentions he remembered something about the person who threw the stone at him. With a grave expression, the commander glares at him, waiting intently for his response. The Duke cuts him off and states that he does not need to say another word regarding the matter. The young man remembers that in the novel, Fetus causes that major incident during next year's competition. But to bring the event forward to this year, he needed a strong enough catalyst. Far from there, the Crown Prince reveals his wish, which is to develop the areas surrounding the temple. With a malicious smile, he states he is going to clear out all the wanderers infesting the capital. Our hero then reflects that Duke Fetus's future has now been completely mapped out. In the forest, the commander continues his hunt with a highly serious expression stamped on his face. The young man knows he will rebel against the royal family, as that is his unalterable destiny. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of light erupts in the middle of the forest, startling the wildlife. Something moves rapidly through the brush, as if fleeing from an imminent threat. Hiding, Rand reflects that he checked the sky 10 times and that there should be 0 witnesses. Looking toward the campsite, he feels like a villain, but quickly reminds himself that he actually is one. At that moment, he wonders what to do once the competition concludes when a woman appears. The first princess, Menel Aberon, calls out to him and notes it is unusual to see him walking alone around there. Surprised, he wonders how he ran into the first princess here and greets her formally. She waves off the formalities and reminds him that they are siblings sharing the exact same blood. The princess then inquires where he left his horse, and he lies, claiming he simply wanted to walk a bit. With a serious expression, the young lady states she cannot make sense of the story he just told. Her face darkens and she asks why he would lie to his own sister. The young man gets nervous at the question and tries to figure out exactly what she means by that. The noblewoman explains she spotted a riderless black horse, and her servant confirmed it was his. She then reveals she ordered the horse to be put down, since it disobeyed royalty and deserved to end. Without a second thought, the young man drops to his knees and apologizes for losing the horse. The sister tells him to lift his head, remarking that it looks as though she is punishing her little brother. With a smile, she says she is glad he made it back safely and offers him another horse. Our hero reflects that the first princess is a difficult individual, as it is impossible to read her thoughts. He wonders why she is leaving and if his special ability simply does not work on her. Later on, back at the campsite, a man tries to make sense of a highly confusing situation. He questions Talon on whether he was really hunting a beast, tripped, and struck his head. The physician says he has seen all types of injuries, but never someone who got hurt by simple stones. The Duke inquires how much time he will need to recover, and the physician states the injury is severe. Talon grows frantic and insists he needs to stay by the Duke's side as his assistant. But the commander calms him down and requests that he just sleep until the closing ceremony. With a smile, the servant agrees and says he will do his absolute best to get some proper rest. The Duke jests that he is the very first assistant to take a vacation during a hunting competition. Agony declares he will win just to grant him the rights to a gold mine as his official wish. The scene shifts and we see a candle burning slowly down upon a wooden table. Lying in bed, Talon appears to be trapped in a nightmare, twisting in absolute discomfort. At that exact moment, someone approaches and slides a scroll into his hand while he sleeps. Far from there, Rand reflects that the Duke is an imperial hound who does not truly care for his servant. He is absolutely certain that the commander's son will also grow up to be a loyal hound. In his tent, the Duke cannot find sleep and decides to step outside to get some fresh air. Suddenly, his eyes widen in shock because he has just spotted something incredibly strange. On the ground, he spots the exact same bag full of stones that the prince ordered him to carry. The heavy bag is leaning against a wooden post, with the stones clearly left on display. With this, the commander resolves to visit the temple and takes the heavy bag along with him. Inside a cathedral, he relates that a very long time ago, a being of salvation descended from the heavens. In a flashback, his son mentions he read all about Sierra the Great in one of his books. The Duke explains that he subdued those who waged war using his mysterious powers. More than 1,000 years ago, he unified the Aberrant Empire and founded the family they currently serve. Agony remembers his precious treasure, his beloved son Flynn, with deep affection. He requests that the boy follow in his footsteps and become a reliable sword for the royal family. Lugging the heavy bag, the man wonders to himself why he is even carrying those stones around. He questions whether he is doing it out of sheer loyalty or due to some other hidden motive. Upon reaching his destination, he beholds a massive mountain of stones right in the middle of the woods. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a horn and seems to recognize that specific call. Back at the camp, the nobles comment that they heard the sounds of wild beasts all night long. They realize the first prince cleared them all out, meaning the competition is already over. The hunt that was supposed to last 4 days was brought to a close in a single night by the hare. Standing before a massive crowd, he displays his absolutely overwhelming hunting record. With this, the crown prince is officially declared the grand winner of the hunting competition. The emperor congratulates him on the victory, and the hare humbly offers his thanks to his father. Following long-standing tradition, the emperor requests that the young prince declare his official wish. The nobles wonder what the wish will be, recalling that last year it was to purge the nomads. The hare states that wanderers are infesting the temple grounds and threatening the dignity of the site. With a smile, he speaks that to restore the temple's aesthetic, he needs to take action immediately. The commander is left completely shell-shocked upon hearing that, and a terrible memory rushes to his mind. We then see knights in the middle of a fierce battle scene, with fire raging all around them. The hare then requests the authority to clear out all the wanderers from that entire region. In his eye, we see the reflection of his father, and the memories of that fateful day return with a vengeance. The commander remembers his father, and is left completely shaken to his core by the recollection. He reflects that he is a loyal hound of the Empire, but asserts that he cannot let this event take place. The Duke imagines himself in the middle of the crowd, drawing his blade to launch an attack. With a determined gaze, he silently apologizes to his son Flynn for what he is about to do. Meanwhile, Talon finally rises from his slumber, but appears highly disoriented. Our hero is looking down at him upside down, and the young man asks in a fright who he is. Talon gets startled and greets him, while Rand advises him to move slowly so he does not get dizzy. Rand tells him to go fetch some medicine, and the servant asks what the 7th prince is doing there. Our protagonist then inquires if the assistant is aware of the Duke's current situation. Confused, the servant states that the closing ceremony must have already commenced by this time. Rand confirms the information and orders the assistant to sprint over there as fast as humanly possible. The servant runs desperately through the crowd, begging for people to clear a path for him. He keeps forcing his way through the dense crowd, a look of pure anxiety painted across his face. Suddenly, the servant freezes upon witnessing a shocking scene, with the Duke dropped on one knee on the ground. The assistant is left completely devastated to see his revered master in such a humiliating position. The crown prince grows irritated and demands to know from the Duke exactly what is going on there. The commander states that his family has served Sierra and protected the royalty for 1,000 years. He then asserts that his family is far better suited to handle the wanderers at the temple. With that, Agony Fetus humbly begs for the emperor to grant him this specific task instead. The heir reluctantly concedes and grants the request in the name of the duke's long-standing loyalty. But the emperor finds it comical that the duke's loyalty would dare block the explicit will of the royalty. The crown prince unleashes his power and asks if the duke honestly believed he would show mercy. With a furious smile, he states the duke has lost his mind and fully deserves to end for his actions. The commander accepts his penalty and states he will pay with his life for interrupting the ceremony. Seeing the scene unfold, Talon dashes forward desperately while screaming out his master's name. Ran observes the entire event and thinks to himself that it has finally begun, hoping the protagonist is watching. Far from there, a hooded man stands by a river, scooping up a bit of water to drink. But suddenly the water he gathered begins to glow with a mysterious blue energy. Completely stunned, the man wonders what on earth that is as the energy wraps entirely around him. In the water, he receives a vision of the ceremony and the royal family's power actively at work on the site. That man was Radel, the true protagonist of the novel Dark Heather that Ran loved so very much.